If you missed it, you and I will be buying less for more as consumer price inflation came in at levels last seen in May of 2009 today. The latest data from Stats SA shows that petrol prices have gone up, you feeling it, to the highest recorded in history at 45% from May to June this year. Now this is followed by a sharp increase in essential food prices, including cooking oil and bread. Let's talk about this latest data now. We're joined by business reporter Kopano Gumbi with me on set. Kopano, put in context then just how bad this is for you and I.
Well, Tembegile, it's definitely not good news and I think we see it, as you said in your intro, we see it all the time, every month. Prices have been increasing, and more specifically, we see that in petrol and we see that in our essential foods, something I'm not sure we have much control over, because the inflation, lots of these economists and analysts tell us that we are importing this inflation, and that really means it has nothing to do with what we are doing in our economy or how much we are producing in our economy. That inflation is not related to that, but rather what's happening outside of our economy, and in the Russia and Ukraine and all of those global movements have had such a significant impact on us. But if you think about it, from last year to now, petrol prices have almost doubled. So it's no surprise when you see Stats SA saying that petrol prices have increased 45% just between May and June. And we see the same with essential goods. Bread is over 20 Rand at this point, something we haven't seen in a long time.
So given that the pressures, as you say, are mainly outside of South Africa, where does that leave us in terms of possible solutions, remedies to at least ease the pressure?
It puts the economy, the country, government in a very difficult position, and with very little wiggle room given what our economy has been through as a result of COVID-19. And so now we see the government trying to do something about it, for example, with the fuel levy reductions, trying to say, okay, we're going to try and ease some of that pressure off. But even that can only be a short-term solution, because there isn't enough money to make up the 6 billion Rand we lose in revenues every month by giving such a levy. In terms of food prices, there's very little that can be done. Many consumers are saying the Competition Commission should get involved here. What are we doing? But those prices are not the retailers saying, oh, we're going to increase the markup because inflation is happening. That's the price that the farmers are getting for the various inputs that are coming into the economy, and that all of that inflation baking in, if I can use that word, to the way that we the numbers we see now.
So Russia's invasion of Ukraine began at the end of February. This is now going into its 6th month. It's a big deal as far as energy prices globally are concerned. We know in terms of wheat production as well, they're also a major player, Russia and Ukraine, in that space. Brings me to my next question then about forecasts for how long we're likely to be in this situation, because it's difficult to predict, isn't it, given that we don't have an end date for a war.
Very difficult to predict. And interestingly enough, the inflation we're seeing now is not even completely related to the war. It's actually because of everything that global economies did during COVID to try and mitigate the terrible losses in their economies. And now we're seeing that inflation slowly working its way in. But on the South African front, at least, and what that means for you and I and how much poorer we're getting and how essential goods are going up, we actually have Elize Kruger, an economist at Bankserv, to tell us a little bit more about how we can unpack these numbers. Elize, thank you for your time this afternoon. I want to start with a very interesting data point, in fact, in what Stats SA has released, is that the inflation for non-durable goods is the highest and is bringing up the average overall. Can we unpack what that means for people when we say the non-durable goods inflation?
I think that really refers to a large extent to your food side. If you look at, I would say how it's categorized from spending point of view, whatever you consume that is like a non-durable. And if you've got something like clothing and shoes, that is a semi-durable. And if you look at something luxury, that's a durable. So this is really the consumables, and that is what you typically buy on a monthly basis. Not only your food side, but also your toiletries and that type of products.
Yeah, Elize, Tembegile and I were talking about it. We're saying that your rands are just paying for less goods. With this inflation at around 7%, does that mean we're getting 7% less in what we're paying for? Or how do we unpack this idea that inflation or price inflation has gone up by 7%?
Yes, so if you look at the overall basket of items, that's the average increase is now, you can say, all price level is 7.4% higher compared to a year ago for your average, price level in the basket. So if you buy the exact same amount or exact same grocery trolley this month, it will cost you 7.4% more compared to last year this time. So if you have got the same income compared to a year ago, that means that a bigger chunk of your budget will go into your grocery trolley. So it's eroding your purchasing power. So you've got less money available for the rest of your expenses per month.
And Elize, you guys have done the study. You've shown us, in fact, that average wages have actually decreased in this last year and this last month's print. So more likely than not, consumers are not earning that 7% that they were, but their expenses have gone up by 7% and more, correct? Correctly. So in that sense, you are indeed worse off compared to a year ago. And now to make it even worse is the fact that everyone's basket is not exactly the same. So, for instance, a lower income household will spend a lot more money proportionally on fuel and food. And those two items have increased a lot more than 7%, as you correctly alluded to. So, then such a household is even worse off for the fact that he's spending a bigger portion of his money on some of the items that increased a lot, and that's been the driving forces behind this 13-year high CPI outcome. And it's likely that this number is going to continue to increase. We have not yet reached the peak of our inflationary pressures, as we know that the impact of the Ukraine and Russia war is really only starting to work its way through our system. So what does that really mean going forward? There is really not much room left for consumers to tighten their belts.
Let me say, in terms of looking forward, I think we're going to have another month, i.e. the month of July, will be another nasty CPI, release, given that we had, if you recall, in the early week of July, we had another big increase in our fuel prices. So that will give you a headline number in the order of 7.8% or so in July. But a bit of good news is that if you look at the current situation, with oil prices having come down during the course of July already to levels closer to $100 per barrel. And if you look at the current over-recovery at our pumps, so it signals that we might have a first drop in our fuel prices in August, to the extent of about R1.65 or so for petrol and about R1.10 or so for diesel. It's a rough calculation, but you just give a feel for it. So it won't be, a drop as big as the hikes we've seen over the past couple of months, but it will be some alleviation on the fuel price side in August. And if you filter that into the CPI calculations, you will see that we might consider July's hefty number to be the upper turning point of the current cycle. So although it's still inflation and prices will still be higher compared to last year, there will be a moderation in terms of that.
Elize Kruger, thank you so much for explaining that for us. Tembekile, there should be some good news, according to Elize at least. A little bit of a reprieve in September or August, but the numbers don't look good for us.
We live and hope. Kopano Gumbi, thank you very much for breaking down all that latest inflation information. All forecasts at this stage is that things are likely to get a lot worse before they get better. So buckle up, South Africa.